Welcome to another episode of Life Stories with Marty. I'm Marty here in Melbourne, and you're getting two authors tonight. Not just authors, you'll hear the stories. Patricia Killeen, who is over in Paris, and Matthew Garrett Stroud is in the States. So, without further ado, I'm going to cross over. So we'll cross over to Paris and to Oklahoma. And let's chat with Patricia and Matthew. Patricia, Matthew, I called you Matt there because you had it on your screen. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Marty. It's a pleasure and an honor to be zooming in from Paris to chat with you, Matthew, today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Marty. What a pleasure to be here, dialing in all the way from Oklahoma. So looking forward to the chat.
Well, it's my privilege, and I know you guys, and I want for our audience here, as I said on the intro, I want to let them know the author, the story behind the author. So I'm going to start out with you, Patricia, and bounce it over to Matthew. Tell us about growing up in Ireland, what it was like, and then if you can dovetail into your career, which if I was to read it out, it would take me 3 hours. The career that you've had, and to dovetail into that, and then let us know and what made you land in Paris, as we can see your lovely background there.
Okay, Marty. Thank you. Well, as you said, Marty, I was born in Dublin in Ireland, and I grew up with elderly parents. At that time, my mother was almost 47 and a half when I was born, and my dad was 61. Nowadays, that's not spectacular, but back in those days, it was. And she had 7 children before. So she went into the Rotunda Hospital and she said, "Doctor, I think I'm pregnant." And the doctor said, "Sit down, Mrs. Killeen. This happens in every woman's life," because she looked about 10 years older. "The periods stop. It's a new phase, a new chapter." And she said to him, "Go off with your, I know I'm pregnant." And she was pregnant. So my poor daddy had the last rites 3 times before I was born. And he retired just 2 weeks before I was born. And I was born a month premature, an awful, ugly, squally, hairy looking baby. And when my sisters and brothers came in, they said, "Do you think we could swap her for the other one, the other baby?" Because there was lovely, fat, pink, happy babies that were almost gurgling already. So anyway, they had to bring home the ugly, hairy, squally baby. And I grew up, and life was, my father was quite ill, so that was very, very tough. But otherwise, having 7 siblings is fantastic because each one of us is completely different. I have a nun, I have, all different sorts of people. And then, I got a job. I was very lucky. I got a fantastic job
Can I
working.
just interrupt for 1 second, Patricia?
Sure, of course, Marty.
Just go back a little bit, please, there, about your schooling and
Yes.
branched over, and then with the family. What was it like growing up in Dublin? And where you grew up, as in the suburb, North Dublin.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I wasn't in the suburbs now, Marty. I was North Dublin.
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon.
I consider myself now really a Dubliner. And it was fantastic because to get into the city centre was like a 20-minute walk or hop on any of the buses. And I went to a school that was quite inner city, quite tough, St. Peter's School. And then I went to an all-girls convent school, Mount Carmel, King's Inn Street. Again, very tough. We were warned about boys, and we were warned if we were ever to sit in a boy's knee to put the newspaper in between our bum bum and the fella's knees, or we might get pregnant. That's the kind of education we had.
I read a lot of newspapers myself.
Oh, I'm sure you did, Marty. I'm sure you did. You might have been one of the fellas they were warning us about.
Oh, God, yes. Anyway,
And
sorry,
then,
Patricia, carry on, please.
not at all. Then I got a fantastic job in Dublin Corporation. And I was on the PR team for Noel Carroll, who was a former athlete, and he set European and world records. A fantastic man. He was just wonderful. But I had that wish for adventure and to travel. And I had asked my mum if I could go abroad and be an au pair. And she said, "No way, no way." She said, "When you're 21, you can go and do what you want. But until you're 21, you'll stay here under your mother's roof." And that's what I did. And then at 21, I saw an application for Saudi Airlines and I sent in my application and I was summoned for an interview in the Gresham Hotel.
Mm.
And at the last interview, a girl put up her hand and she said, Sir, she said, Sir, are there sharks in the Red Sea, sir? And he looked at us in pity and he said, My dear girls, the sharks you will have to worry about are the two-legged kind. And he never said a true word. And off I went to Saudi Arabia and then I was based in New York. And then finally I got my foot in the door in Paris, which was that was my dream to live in Paris, Marty. Even as a young
Why
girl.
did you want to live in Paris before you met your husband, Philippe? Why did you want to live in Paris?
And I forget the name of the song, but do you remember that song? She danced like Zizi Gonair. She lives in
Oh,
an apartment on the Boulevard Saint Michel. It was all this song about this girl.
yeah.
And then even my siblings, they read me stories. It was Puss in Boots, but in English, Puss in Boots was written by a French author, but they read me that when I was very young. I think it was the first book I read. And I always remember a line, Oh la la, what a fine bridge. And that's how I learned how to read was with that book. And it was just always, oh, one of my first holidays was to Paris. I just thought it was the best place on earth. You couldn't get better.
And then tell us about meeting Philippe.
Oh, that was
How you met a film producer, director, very I've he's very well known. Tell us how you met. Was that a love affair or a mistake?
Oh, that was love at first sight and love at first bite. It's always one of those things, Marty. Did it ever happen to you in your life that the night you didn't want to go out and your friend persuaded you was the night that the most exciting thing happened?
I
I
did. I
don't
have 5 children.
yeah. So yeah. So my friend Olga wanted me to go to this party and I was very tired. I just didn't want to go, but she was pestering me, and she wanted to meet this fella called Antoine Decaune, who's a very famous TV presenter in France, and he was meant to be at this party. So in the end, I said, okay, we'll go to the party. So in the lift, I saw this man, tall, dark, handsome, a little bit, kind of sophisticated, but in a kind of a cool kind of a way. And I tell you, he caught my eye and I caught his. And that's how it started. Now, my poor friend Antoine de Caunes wasn't there at all. It was a different Antoine. But you know something? She got off with that Antoine. It didn't matter. So she met an Antoine and I met my husband. And as soon as he held my hand, I knew that was it, to be honest, Marty. I knew this was someone different, someone Frenchmen, and I can throw this straight over to Matthew. Frenchmen can be frivolous. They can be unreliable. In our book, we call them lean, mean, sexual, philosophical machines. What do you think? Would you agree with that, Matthew?
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
Matthew, before we move on, can you give us a little bit for my listeners? She's cracking me up there. But can you give us a little bit for the listeners where you grew up and a little bit
Absolutely.
about yours as we're joining together in this conversation?
Absolutely. And, I'm going to, first of all say, I don't know what's happening with my camera. I've got this new computer and it's trying to adjust to my face. So if you see me going like this or like this, it's because the camera's moving. I have no idea what's happening.
Matthew, you look
So,
gorgeous. Just
ah, well, in any case, so my background, a little different than Patricia's. I grew up the son of a Presbyterian pastor, born in Little Rock, Arkansas. Grew up in the Midwest, and I always dreamt of France and Paris. When I was a kid, my parents read the story of Madeline, a young girl who lives in Paris, and I knew that one day I had to go there. So my story's a little bit more, I don't know, criminal, perhaps. But but my father is also a German professor and sent me over to school in Germany every summer. And one year he said, take my credit card. If anything happens, you have a lifeline. Don't worry. I was 16 or 17 years old. Well, I used that lifeline to buy a round trip ticket from Berlin to Paris in first class on Air France. Um,
Good for you, Matthew.
oops.
Goodbye, Matt.
Yeah. So I remember I landed in Paris and the whole flight, the experience on Air France, I didn't understand anything. I was this kid from the Midwest with, big beaver teeth, kind of a bowl cut, if you can imagine, and landing in Paris. And I remember walking out to the taxi stand and, monsieur, a taxi. And I said, take me to the Eiffel Tower. And this guy thought he hit the jackpot. He said, "Oh, do you want to drive around?" And we did. And I saw that meter just running and running and running, but I didn't care because I had the credit card. And then I realized the taxi didn't take credit cards. They wanted cash. So in any case, I remember being dropped off in front of the Eiffel Tower. Um, and making my way up to the Champs-Élysées. And this was before Google Maps and all those things, and it felt so natural. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't know how I made it to the Champs-Élysées, but this must be some kind of destiny that I belong here. I was probably just following the signs, but I like to imagine that it was destiny. And so after that trip to Paris, I knew that I was going to do everything possible in my life to give myself the chance to live there. So fast forward, I came back to the US, did my studies. I spent a year in Brazil teaching English, but my real dream was just to get back to Paris. And so eventually, I started taking French classes. I had this fantastic teacher, and then went on to grad school. We had this program to get another master's degree in France, kind of a two for the price of one. So I get to France. And I remember going into a bakery on the first day and pointing around, and the woman very rushed, qu'est-ce que vous voulez? And I said very slowly, trying so hard in my best French, je voudrais pain au chocolat. And she looked at me in French and she said very quickly, "Oh, hurry up! This is not a class for foreigners today." And I was so humiliated and I was so embarrassed, but at the same time, it hit this spark in me. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to learn French and I'm going to learn everything about France because I don't want this to ever happen to me again. And by the time I left France, people couldn't tell where I was from. They would say, "Oh, we can't tell. Are you Belgian or Swiss?" They never guessed I was American. And it was that spark from that first day that was kind of the through line, the humiliation. So yeah, and now I don't know how I ended up in Oklahoma. That's probably another story. But I traded the City of Lights for Tornado Alley. I spent about 20 years doing corporate PR, and then just decided, you know what, you live once. I'm going to go for it, and I'm going to jump, and let's hope the net's there. So I've spent the last few months starting my own business, kind of
That's a
doing
dog business, is that
it's
correct?
a dog business. So
Now, do you
doing
know what? Can I just say to you, Matthew, is I have a dog business,
what?
dog buddy daycare center.
Wow.
Yeah, and
Oh,
and and,
heck
and
yeah.
how just like I have three ex-wives and five children. Now, honestly, two more and I'm done. But the point is that they start dropping off their dogs. And when I sold my hotels and my cafes and then went into doing the podcast, and they drop them off. You don't get paid for it. They call that maintenance.
Volunteer.
Okay. Even though they're dogs, and they would drop them off, and I started looking after, and then I just thought I loved them because I actually love dogs more than I love people.
I
I
can
have
tell
to
you.
say that without insulting people. Please don't send me in emails on this. But I found that, and I love, and I do it to this day, even though I do everything. And my dogs are like, they're my passion.
Don't get me started on dogs because I could talk for hours, but you know what I love is dogs are unconditional.
Yeah,
And you know what?
unconditional.
Correct.
Every morning I wake up and my dogs, it doesn't matter if I screwed up, if I'm fat, if I'm ugly. my dogs love me and they're happy to see me and they just want their breakfast and they eat the same breakfast every day and they love it like it's foie gras and cream puffs. So, but just the kind of tail end of my story after Paris, and meeting Patricia, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit, which I think I would just say a quick parenthesis. Patricia kind of saved my parents' Paris experience. And we can talk more about it, but Paris is a beautiful place. It's also a lonely place. And, that comment of not French class for foreigners, is something that kind of resonates of being an outsider. And so I spent about 10 years in Paris, worked for a couple of PR firms, pretty big clients. One of them brought me to the Democratic Republic of Congo. So I spent 4 years doing PR in Africa. I kind of called it James Bond meets Mad Men. That was a wild, wild time. And then from there back to the US, working for a number of different companies. And then, like I said, I think life is about reinvention too, and not having the path traced for you and maybe taking chances and seeing where it leads. And so that's kind of what I'm doing right now. And I'm thrilled to be here and talk more with you all.
And great, Matthew. And if I can just chuck one question in there, is that we kind of skipped over. What was your parents like when you were growing up, or your
Ooh.
siblings?
Absolutely. So I come from, my parents are divorced. Like I said, my dad is a German professor and a pastor, a very um, kind and introspective and supportive person who probably let me screw up too many times. Um, hence the Paris story. And let me screw up, but also, pushed me to follow what I wanted. But then also knowing that, sometimes our choices have consequences, and I didn't choose to be an investment banker, or a lawyer. And then my mom was a photographer and an artist. She lives in Boise, Idaho, with my sister. She's now a grandmother. And I would describe my mom as the person I get my crazy ideas from. The other day
Oh
she
yeah,
said,
blame your mom.
he said to me, you worked on a book and you're doing a screenplay. I think I'm going to write a children's book. And then we just go. And I said, well, I think I'm going to do this. And we just feed off of each other. And she's funny and full of love. But I think we're both kind of eccentric, maybe a little bit nuts. But that's
Well,
fun.
define that, but we won't go into that. But back to you, Patricia, for a minute. Given similar, you grew up in Ireland. What was it? It was at Phibsborough? Was it?
Phipps, that's right. And then, as I said, I went off to Saudi Arabia. My mom and my sister brought me to the airport. There was a girl from Northern Ireland, and her mammy was waving a little flag, and off we went. We had no idea what we were getting into. And my mom couldn't understand that I left Ireland. They wrote an article in the newspaper because I was quite well known for being on Noel Carroll's public relations team. They just couldn't believe it. They said, "What next? Will Noel Carroll be becoming a pilot? What next is going to happen?" So anyway, after I met after Saudi, I worked for an airline, for a diplomat, a foreign diplomat, and I managed his two 727s. This was like luxury, like you just can't imagine it. And but I was always on standby. I could be called to go here, go there, whatever. And when I met my lovely French husband, this started to be a pain in the ass. I was like, what if I go off and he meets somebody else? Like this could be, I don't know when I'm coming back. So I actually got another job. I got a job in a hotel, in a luxury hotel for a while as an assistant manager. And I worked for a big press group called the Nouvel Observateur as an editorial assistant. And then when I had my second child, I needed more to earn more money. And that's when I got the job in the French corporation where I met the new communications and PR manager, Mr. Matthew Stroud. And when I met him, Marty, I was like a kid in the playground. You know, when you're a kid and that sparkling new kid comes in,
Yes,
and a lot of
yes.
people want to be friends with him, and you think, I mightn't have a chance, but I'll try anyway. I'll try anyway. The thing is, the fact that we were both foreigners, that,
Yeah.
resounded. We resounded with each other. We knew, even I'm Irish, he's American. There were so many things we had in common, and we became the best of friends. And we'd have wild nights out and days out and parties. We spent Christmas
Oh,
together.
I could imagine.
We had
And we
lunches.
laughed. We
Yeah,
laughed. Oh my goodness. I can't even tell you with Patricia, we would just start telling stories. And I mean, I would laugh until I thought I was going to pass out. I
We're
mean,
just going to flash up some pictures there, guys, of the guys out partying. Carry
oh my
on.
goodness.
oh, yeah, those were the days. And I have to say, Marty, we were like siblings without rivalry, because there's always rivalry among siblings, but we were siblings without rivalry, and it was a true relationship, kind of kindred souls, and in unapologetic and unsophisticated jargon, I'd say BFFs, best friends.
But didn't that bring you into how you co-authored the book? So you didn't just become friends, you became a little bit more as in you had the same ideas or the same stuff in your head, if that makes sense, guys.
Yes, that's absolutely true, Marty, because we were always exchanging these crazy stories or having crazy nights out together. And then one day we were sitting, funnily enough, in an Irish pub, and we just came up with
Oh,
the idea, why don't we write down a fiction, but that's somehow inspired from our own social life and things we've done, and people might be interested in seeing the sites we've seen, hearing about the historic details in Paris. And we use quotes to open every chapter, which I think are fabulous. I'll tell you some of the quotes later. But I'm going to maybe pass over to Matthew, because some of the places that are described in the book, maybe like Le Tango, you'd like to
Yeah.
describe, or some other places. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing with Paris too is, there's so many tourists that go every day. When you're living in Paris, you see these buses, these double-decker buses going around, and people going to all these sites, the Musée d'Orsay, the Eiffel Tower. But there's so much more to Paris than that. There are people that live there, that love there, that are born there and die there. I mean, it's a city that's not just a tourist attraction. And I think that can be easy to forget. And when you live there, I remember one of the things I would do, I would walk to work, which is not something I could ever do here in the US. But I would walk to work and I would always try to take a slightly different route, one way or another, going to my apartment or going to the office, just take a different street. And I always just think about, who walked there before, who lived there, what were their lives like, who were these people? And I think, the book and our ideas are a combination of this love and this fascination with Paris, but then also our experience as foreigners in Paris and being, outsiders. And so some of the places, the tango, so that is, if you can imagine in the Mare, which means swamp in English, so it was a swamp. It was one of the last developed neighborhoods in Paris. I think people still did not have indoor plumbing until just maybe like the 80s or 70s. It's kind of wild, and now it's very chic and fabulous to live in the Marais. Go get your baguettes and whatnot. But there's a place called the Tango, and the Tango is kind of on the outside. It looks or it looked when I lived there a little bit like it was kind of stuck in the 60s, but really not much to it. And then you would go inside and you would see French people line dancing to Western music. I mean, just where are we? This is wild. And it was such a friendly place. And you would have, drag queens and music from the 80s. And it just felt like this place where everybody can belong.
you felt
But on the outside,
comfortable. comfortable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So places like that, there's a cafe called Cafe Beaubourg, which was just down the street from my apartment. And it's, I would say, famous or infamous for the snotty wait staff. But it's also very fabulous to sit at the cafe like you're someone and write your novel, sit outside, smoke your cigarette, and watch the passers go by. And they had this thing, it was a steamed milk with vanilla. And I decided, in France early on, people said, Americans have no opinions. They just come and they say, oh, I'll drink whatever, or I don't care, I'll have whatever you're having. So I knew early on I needed to have some strong opinions. So the two things were I'll only drink champagne and steamed milk with a little dash of vanilla. And so I would go into that cafe and they would say, oh, qu'est-ce que je vous sers? And I would say, un lait chaud à la vanille with so much pride because I knew exactly what I wanted. And you would sit there and you would just kind of stare at the people. The chairs were so uncomfortable. Patricia, you didn't want to really sit there, so you had to kind of be like this in your chair and it just made you fabulous. So lots of places like that. It's a
But
love.
it's just, sorry to jump in there, Matthew, is that where, and I'm going to throw it over to Patricia for a minute, where do you get your inspiration, both of you? And I'll start with your writing. You're talking about the cafe and that, and I understand that. It's like going out talking to people. So where do you get your, I've looked at your writing and I've seen, and it's very, it's from the soul as well. Where do you get that inspiration from? Starting with you, Patricia, and then on to Matthew.
Well, as I mentioned, it was really exchanging stories, and then there's a twist in this story we can't tell you. I'm really sorry, Marty and listeners, because it's a twist that has never been treated yet in a book or in a movie. So I have to keep that part secret. But I'm going to read you the description of the back of the book.
Yeah.
Franklin Ryan, a young gay Harvard graduate and rising PR star, arrives in Paris to embark upon a promising career and finally uncover the mystery behind the French family he has waited a lifetime to meet. When the taxi driver drops him off for a job interview in the dreary industrial suburbs of Paris, he senses the magical city he has always imagined may have a darker side. Inside, circumstances lead Franklin to confront an unfathomable secret. Irish Laura, a flamboyant and long-term Paris resident, opens doors to intriguing locations. Franklin discovers the haunts of Oscar Wilde, Ernest Hemingway, and Wallace Simpson. His quest to decipher secrets lead to encounters with a real-life Parisian clairvoyant, a spanking party, and being nearly drowned on a French movie set. Navigating the mafia-style politics of his new job with a perpetual smile is reminiscent of a Molière comedy. His new life comes with glamorous costume parties, weekends in the countryside, and learning new cultural dating codes to seduce the Frenchmen. Lean, mean, sexy, philosophical culture machines. Franklin finds a new family, mostly made up of foreigners. However, would he find the courage to succeed in this shady city of life? So, both of us write individually. I write for the Irish Times. Sometimes I write for Irish Central. I've written a screenplay that hasn't been published. Matthew writes. I let Matthew talk about his writing. But this was our combined efforts. We put our heart and soul into this, really, I have to
Oh,
say,
is there,
Marty.
can I just, and we'll cross over to Matthew now, can I ask, is just to brief what you told me, and people will read this book, is that based on reality? Is there a certain amount of, a little bit of let's say, a fiction in it, but is that based on someone's, or a combination of people's stories? That's all I'll ask.
Is that for Matthew, the question?
Yes.
Who or both of us answer? Well, it is a fiction, definitely a fiction. But there is an inspiration from the characters. I mean, Matthew would be a kind of would have some similarity to the main protagonist, who's called Franklin Ryan. Definitely, there's some similarities there. And the non-fictional places would be the places, the Ritz, the Hotel Maurice, Le Tango, all the places they went. And in
Yeah.
some cases, like for example, I go to the Moulin Rouge. In my own life, I went to interview two lovely Irish dancers, their sisters that work there. So then I'd have a chapter in there about the Moulin Rouge, but the fictional story with the main protagonist would also be in the Moulin Rouge, but he wasn't there at that time. You see, we'd use the beauty and the fascination of Paris into this, entwining it with this fictional story. What do you think, Matthew? Could you add anything?
Yeah, it's almost kind of like a recipe, you know. I mean, I remember with Patricia, oh my goodness, you know, there would be days where we would go and meet for lunch and it was tough. There were times in the office where I didn't understand what the hell was going on. And meeting Patricia for lunch was like this breath of air, of oxygen with laughs. And I would say, "Can you believe, you know, this just happened? I don't understand." And we would just laugh, and she would say, "Hold on, I've got one for you too." And I think, you know, to answer your question, Marty, about inspiration, and then coming back to that part, you know, I think my inspiration is twofold. I would say that, you know, I think laughter and stories are a way of getting through. You know, I think life can be beautiful, but a lot of people, you know, will say as you get older and experience more life, you experience more, you know, sadness and difficulty. And I think by finding beauty and joy and particularly humor, it allows us to kind of get through and keep going and to see that beauty and to sustain us when the world around us might feel like it's, you know, falling apart or we don't belong. And wherever I have gone, whether it's in Paris or the Congo or here in Oklahoma, I've always found stories and kind of crazy stories, but they're really just kind of everyday life. But I see the absurdity, the beauty, the love, the joy, all these things in kind of the world around me. And then, you know, the book and the inspiration, like Patricia said, I see the characters as kind of like a salad of, you know, the location was an actual spot in Paris. The protagonist, yes, I worked in PR, and you know, we kind of inspired a little bit of that character from that. But then, you know, we would maybe take a story or an idea about somebody that we met and weave that in, or you know, this person wore a red scarf and then, you know, bring that in. So it's really this mismatch or mishmash, I should say, of ideas to tell the story and build the characters into something
And,
that we
and and
wanted.
Matt, do you find, and I'll ask both Patricia as well, did you find that some of the stories are part of your characters? Like you have to be putting
Absolutely.
yourself into these stories because I can read
Mhm.
you're very passionate, and I've known Patricia very well. Oh, well, geez, I buried her ears. God love her. She had to listen to me, Matt. Oh, God. But what I'm saying is that your passion and everything with both of you is that what
Mhm.
like you almost sound like soulmates in your passion
Hmm.
and in what you do because
Mhm.
you're able to speak. So over to you, Patricia.
Well, you know, there is a certain amount of this definitely in the book. And to go back to the Rotunda Hospital in Dublin and
Hmm.
to getting baptized, like one of my sisters had read Dr. Zhivago and she wanted to call me Laura. She was Lara. She was very keen on this Lara character in Dr. Zhivago and she wanted to call me Lara. And they brought this awful ugly little baby off to the priest, and the priest said, "This child will not be called Lara. There's no Saint Lara. You bring me a Saint Lara, we'll call her Lara, but there's no Saint Lara." And my sister was so disappointed. She thought she's ugly, she's hairy, she's squally, and we thought we'd give her a nice name at least. And then the priest said, this child will be called Patricia because she was born in the patrician year. And that's it. He had no time. There was 100 other people lined up to get their babies baptized. So in the book, I give the main female character the name that I didn't get, Lara. And because I think
Ah,
sometimes when you hear a story like that as a child, you wonder, would my life have been terribly different if I'd been called Lara? Would it have had some sort of an impact? And yes, my fears, some of Lara's loneliness, because when you're a foreigner in a country, it might be easier there's a huge amount of Irish people going to Australia now. And it might be easier when you emigrate to an English speaking country rather than going to a French country. I don't know, rather than going to France with a different language. But there can be moments of loneliness. I mean, I have two daughters, and in the book, Laura has two daughters. My daughters were brought up speaking English and French, but are more comfortable in French. All of these things that wouldn't happen if I was just living in an English speaking country. So we live the high life, the good life, but there's a certain amount of pathos and everything in both of our characters. And I think that comes across in the book. And what also comes across is the importance of friendship. Lara and Franklin in the book, and the group of friends we made around us. I mean, and I think that's when you're a foreigner in a country. I don't know if you'd agree with this, Marty. Your friends, your family, yes, but your friends become a lifeline as well. And the people you meet. And in the book, there's a subliminal message that we're saying be open to any kind of help from everyone. Don't rule out anything. And if people, we don't use these words in the book, but what we're saying is if people make you feel bad or make you hate other people or make your view of life narrower, that person or that philosophy or that religion probably isn't the way to go. Just move on, get help someplace
I,
else,
I,
get friends someplace
I'd
else.
say, Patricia, as my mum used to say to me, God rest her, and she would go to me, take in 100% of what people say and throw out what you don't need, and don't let it take up your headspace. And I think that's kind of the basic rules that I've lived by. Don't get me wrong, I'm no saint, that's for sure. But you know, letting people talk and letting them speak, and just what you're saying, and you guys are like soulmates, and obviously you have your own is just finding a friend to talk to or someone that you can confide in. It's like one of my ex-wives, she goes to me, she argued with me one time. I said, well, you know what? I said, because I know her husband, I said, I said, we know too much about each other, we can't fall out. But it's not that, it's the
Mm.
opposite. When you know
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
someone, as my mum said,
Yeah.
marry your best friend.
Yeah, very good advice. Yeah. And then, as a foreigner, sometimes you do meet people, tricky people that, because
Mm.
you don't get all the nuances and the languages and everything. And in the book, I'll pass this back over to Matthew, but the character Franklin, he actually buys a cat when he's very sad. And this brings out Matthew's love of animals. There's a K
Yeah.
in Paris, it's fabulous. And Matthew, tell them about it. It's one pet shop after another. Would you like to
This
take over?
pet shop, pet shop after pet shop. And this goes back to, what I said earlier about this unconditional love of animals. And, Paris, for all its beauty, I remember in the very beginning when I didn't know anyone spending holidays by myself because I couldn't afford to go home. And it was on the one hand so lonely because I thought I can't believe, it's Christmas Day. I'm sitting here in my apartment all alone, and there's all these people, with their families or their friends out there, and I'm gonna get a pet. And the interesting thing about that is, I remember one year walking outside of my apartment on the Ile Saint Louis and feeling so lonely and depressed. And all I wanted was a chocolate eclair and some pink champagne, and I didn't care. And I walked outside and I looked in this cafe, and it was full of people sitting by themselves. And there was this kind of comfort that I wasn't the only one who was
Mm.
alone on that holiday, And even though I wasn't with anybody, I just remember thinking, okay, I'm not by myself and I have to write my own story, make my own story. So I thought, well, why not get a pet? So I went on the next day when things opened back up down to the quay along the Seine, and you had the bouquinistes selling all their wares along the Seine, which you can see in not quite in Patricia's background. And I walked into this store, and there were just puppies and cats. And I knew that I couldn't have a dog. Well, I knew that I technically wasn't supposed to have any pets in my apartment, but a cat was easier. So there were these two cats and this little white fur ball, which in the book is modeled after my cat, who recently passed, my French kitty,
Oh,
Smila. But I saw these cats and I thought, that's my friend. And beautiful white, sort of Siamese, but with a little smashed face cat. So I pulled out my little debit card and bought that cat. And I had a seafoam green Vespa that I didn't really know how to drive. My moped was parked out front. And didn't know how to drive it, but I had it, and because you didn't need a license for that, and I put the cat, strapped her over my back, and we zipped along down the little streets of Paris back to the Ile Saint-Louis, and I had this great little. She was about 6 pounds, really tiny, and every month when I had to pay rent. The landlord's son would always use it as an excuse to come by the apartment, make sure the foreigner didn't have any parties. The foreigner didn't have parties. He just had a litter box and this crazy cat. So he would send me a message. I'm coming back to collect the rent. I want the small bills. And so I would get all my money together, 20s and 50s. And I would have to scoop up the litter box, the cat bowls, the cat, pack it up, put it on my Vespa, and drive down the street and hide. And so that was the inspiration for the cat in the book. Yeah.
Matthew, Matthew, you're cracking me up here. You're very funny. You've got a great sense of humor. I want to ask you something serious. Is your life gone through? We've gone through the good parts and everything.
Mhm.
What was your worst time in life? What upset
Mm.
you or caused you to think in a different way? What was your downside? We all have them. And then
Yeah.
I'm going to push it over to Patricia with the same question, but you go first, Matthew, please.
I would almost think that it was my breakup in France. When I got there, it was so lonely. I wanted to find friends. I wanted to find a life. I thought I had met someone and had this French family, and I thought this is it. I'm never coming back to the US. I've got it. I've got a partner. I've got this French life. I've got a job in Paris. I mean, the little, pudgy kid from the Midwest, like how did I do this? And one day it just crashed down. I mean, everything blew up. And, my partner left me, threw me out. So I was a foreigner in France. I had nowhere really to go. He had decided that he had met someone else, and so I needed to leave. And so I remember packing up my few belongings. He had already emptied out the closet, put everything on the ground. And I said, Where do I go?" And so that's not my problem. And it was absolutely brutal. But it was also the kick in the ass that I think I needed. But I
Yeah.
went through months, maybe even a year of soul searching, wondering, what the hell am I doing in France? I don't have to be here. I love it, but is France giving me what I need? Work was horrible. It was so hard to go to work and to smile and pretend,
Mhm.
and then come home to being alone with my cat, and thinking, how did I not see this coming? What world was I living in that I didn't see that things were about to blow? And And I think that was probably the lowest point because, I think it's one thing when, and I'm not saying that this is any easier, but in your own country, in your own language, in a world that when things go badly, I think I wouldn't say it's easier, but I would call my dad or I would know maybe what to do. But in France, there was nobody, no one to help. Patricia was by my side and listened to me, and I shared my stories with her, and she made me laugh and helped me get through that. But it really felt like the whole world just crashed down in this foreign country, and I would say that was probably the toughest moment in my adult life.
Yeah, and
So
Patricia, the
yeah.
same question to you.
I'd have to say, Marty, was my dad's sickness. He had a sickness called arterial sclerosis, and he became like I can remember I was very close with him until I was about 6, but then he became really, too ill. The illness had a terrible effect on him altogether, and I had to be very I had to always be agreeing with him and agreeing with him. I couldn't make any ripples, so I became a very kind of boring person in a way, just agreeing, keeping an even keel all the time. And I think, when I came to Paris, like as Matthew says about the incidents in the bakery, we've all had those incidents in Paris. And in Paris, there's no, like, I think I used to be a bit passive aggressive. There's no time for passive aggressive in Paris. People are just aggressive. They just bite your nose off or nothing. And I too had a bakery experience. I went in with it was a cold winter day, and I went in with my daughter in a little buggy. And there was this woman there. They all have their little dogs. The dog was peeping out of the bag. They all bring their dogs to the restaurants, to the bakeries, to the butchers, wherever. The dogs go everywhere. And she told me off for bringing the pushchair, not leaving my daughter outside in the cold. She told me off, and she's there with this dog, like salivating all over the croissants. So you learn. Like I remember my sister coming to Paris, and I accidentally knocked down some postcards when we were looking in a tourist stand. And the woman she told me off, like to such an extent, my sister had to sit down on the pavement to laugh. She just couldn't believe you could get into such trouble for such a small thing. And then she was even more surprised when told the lady off back. I said, well, why did you put them there, Mrs.? Why didn't you put them in a more logical place? My sister just couldn't believe this as Irish people were brought up to be very, very acquiescent, very nice, very kind,
Yeah.
never lose our tempers. And in France, you just have to leave all of that behind. You really have to
As,
find your voice.
as my
And
mum
in the
used to
book,
say, Patricia, she'd go, don't say what you're thinking.
exactly. But in France, you have to say what you're thinking and you have to say it out loud and clear. And in the book, both Franklin and Lara, they find more of a voice and they blossom.
Yeah.
And so many people I know in Paris, they have blossomed. I've brought nieces and nephews over, Marty, and the way they arrived as shy, quiet people, and the way they left, like, and my nieces left Paris like movie stars. And they both married, my nieces both married French men. Well, one guy is French and one guy is French, but with Italian background.
Well, I'll
But they
have to
met their
go to
husbands in
Paris
France. But
myself soon.
oh, Marty, we're waiting for you. We're waiting for you.
If it's
Guys,
okay, I got
just
to
to
jump
say
in.
that we've only got a few minutes left on the show. So what I'd like to do is, Matt, if I can start off, Matthew, sorry, I called you Matt. It's because one of my ex-wives, her husband's Matt. I can't keep up with them. I get them confused. When the kids ring, I go, which one are you? But Matt, I want to finish off and tell people what message you would send out. And we're going to put up, we didn't get through all of the books, but we're going to put up the contacts for you guys. But what message would you send out? And especially this, like obviously as a gay man, that you would like to send out there as a message for other people all over the world, because you're very articulate. I just want you to send a message, and then I'll ask Patricia, and then we'll finish up the show for tonight, guys. So Matthew, over to you.
I think probably the biggest message, and this goes back, Marty, to something you said, what was your lowest point? And I'm going to take that away from a specific moment and I'm going to talk about a feeling. And I think that learning from my mistakes and how to truly believe in myself and have confidence in who I am, in
Mm,
what I believe, in who I love and where I'm going in life, and not let all the people around me who have an opinion, who may want me to fail, who may be looking at it through their own lens, but really learning to find kind of my North Star. For some people that might be faith, that might be a hobby, that might be, reading or writing. But I think my message is to find out really inside who you are and believe in yourself and never to let the world around you pull you down, punch you in the face and kick you, and to always stand up, to do it with grace. It's so easy to get mad these days with everything you see on social media and the news. But believe in yourself. It is one of the hardest things I think I've ever had to do, and I struggle with that every day. But believing in who I am and what I stand for.
and Matthew, can I just say I'm very proud of you. What you're speaking about there is for it doesn't matter what religion, what sexuality you are, we all have problems dealing with ourselves.
Mhm.
We all have work out how we're dealing with ourselves. And I can't thank you enough. We speak out. I'll be pestering you now. I'll be on the phone. Now, Patricia, over to you with the same question.
Well, I'd continue where Matthew left off, believe in yourself. And I would continue on something I said earlier in the interview. Be open to people. There are wonderful people out there. For example, at the advice of one of my best friends, Milena, she told me to get out more, to go and join groups. And I joined a writers group, and this was one of the most fantastic things I ever did. And it was there that I met Tendai Olga Sharu, who became our final editor, and she's done the cover of the book. And she's the publisher. Her publishing company is called Whetstones Publishing. And I also met a lovely girl through her, Sarah Richmond, that helped us because a lot of our book is stories, and she helped us weave them together, which is very important, transitional chapters and everything like that. And I'll leave you with a little quote, Marty. It's one of the quotes Franklin uses in the book, and it's an Ernest Hemingway quote. And he says, "If you are lucky enough to have lived in Paris as a young man, then wherever you go for the rest of your life, it stays with you. For Paris is a movable feast." And I would say to you all, come to Paris, and whatever you get here, you bring it with you and you keep it. It lights you up for the rest of your life, Marty. So we're waiting for you, Marty.
No, that's look, guys, we got to wrap the show up. But Patricia, it's an absolute honor. And Matthew, you're a delight talking to you. And I hope we can do more with it. We will put up all the details so people can contact you. We'll stay on for a minute, but we'll wrap up the show. And thank you to our listeners in Australia and all over the world. And go to moralinjurynational.com, moralinjuryinternational.com, and you can see all the podcasts and more behind the scenes. And for today, thank you very much.